the dog who wouldn't retire, and uncovered a 15-year-old murder. It was supposed to be Ranger's last week on the force. At 7 years old, the decorated German Shepherd was being quietly pushed into retirement, just another file closed in a department that had seen too much. But then something strange happened. He started scratching the same wall every night. Same spot, same desperation. They said it was age, confusion, maybe trauma. But Ethan, the officer who'd worked beside Ranger for years, saw something else in the dog's eyes. Something urgent, something unignorable. What they found behind that wall didn't just reopen a cold case, it cracked a city wide open. The night shift always felt longer when summer slipped into its final weeks, the kind where the air held its breath, and the town of Elmridge seemed frozen in the weight of its own stillness. Ethan Cole parked the cruiser with a soft grunt. His body ached more these days, an ache not born of age, but of memory. 30 years in uniform, 15 in the K-9 unit, and all of them stitched with the quiet grief of things unsaid. The clock read 11:42 p.m. But the real measure of the hour was the stillness of Ranger beside him. The German Shepherd sat upright in the back seat, amber eyes scanning the dark like he always had. His muzzle had gone gray in the last year, the telltale salt slowly overtaking the pepper. But his presence was the same, alert, poised, loyal to a fault. Ethan reached back and tapped the gate separating them. "End of the run, partner," he said, voice low. "Time to head in." Ranger didn't move at first. His eyes stayed fixed on something Ethan couldn't see. Not unusual. Ranger had always perceived things differently. Sound, scent, emotion. But tonight, his stillness felt different. The department was half-lit when they walked in, most of the lights dimmed to save on budget. The building creaked and sighed like an old body trying to sleep. Ethan moved with habit through the back hallway toward the kennels, but Ranger suddenly paused, ears perked. He turned, not toward his usual room, but down the corridor to the old evidence wing. His nails clicked against the tile as he veered. Ethan frowned. "Ranger?" The dog didn't respond, just trotted forward, nose to the floor. Ethan followed, more curious than concerned. The old evidence storage had been unused since the reorganization after the 2008 fire. Now it was mostly overflow-rusted filing cabinets, expired files, and boxes with labels long faded. The overhead lights flickered, then steadied as they stepped inside. That's when Ranger froze body tense, eyes locked on a wall near the back corner. Then, slowly at first, he approached. The moment his nose touched the baseboard, he began to paw. 1, 2, 3 times. Then, more urgently. He whined, a low, guttural sound Ethan hadn't heard in years. "Hey," Ethan said, stepping forward. "What are you doing?" Ranger ignored him. The pawing grew faster. His nails scraped against old plaster with alarming intensity. A soft yelp escaped his throat frustration, not fear. "Ranger, enough!" Ethan knelt, placing a firm hand on the dog's back. Ranger stopped, panting. His chest rose and fell rapidly, the amber eyes flicking toward Ethan, then back to the wall. "What the hell are you trying to say?" Ethan stood, running a hand through his hair. The paint was chipped. Nothing unusual. No sounds. No odor. Nothing he could sense. He crouched beside the wall, tapping lightly. Hollow. Of course it was. "Come on, partner," he said softly. tugging Ranger's collar. "Let's not start a ghost hunt." But even as they walked away, Ethan's stomach churned. Something about the urgency in Ranger's behavior. It wasn't random. It wasn't senility. It was insistent. Later, in the break room, Ethan sat with a mug of stale coffee, staring into it like it could explain what had just happened. Ranger rested nearby, uncharacteristically alert. His ears twitched at every creak. He kept glancing toward the hallway as if waiting for something. Ethan took a slow sip. Maybe it was nothing. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the start of something that had waited years to be uncovered. He didn't know yet. But the whisper in his gut, the one honed by decades on the force, told him this wasn't over. Not yet. The second night came with rain. Thin sheets fell across the Elmridge skyline, like a curtain pulled over a quiet stage. The wipers squeaked in tired rhythm as Ethan Cole sat behind the wheel of the cruiser, parked under the flickering streetlight near Main and Holloway. The night was slow, no calls, no movement, just the ticking of the clock and the silent presence of the dog beside him. Ranger hadn't slept. He sat rigid in the passenger seat, ears tilted, eyes fixed on some unseen point in the dark. "You gonna do this all night?" Ethan muttered, glancing over. Ranger's tail thumped once more, muscle memory than greeting. He didn't look away from the window. There'd been something about last night that stayed with Ethan. Not just the pawing, but the look in the dog's eyes. Focused. Desperate even. Not confusion. Not aging. Something else. Like trying to speak a language humans had long forgotten. By the time their shift ended at 2:00 a.m., Ethan was exhausted, but he found himself guiding Ranger down the same corridor as the night before, half out of habit, half curiosity. The old evidence room loomed ahead, door half closed. As soon as they reached it, Ranger pulled hard on the leash. "Whoa, whoa, easy." But the dog was already lunging. Ethan opened the door fully and let him in. And then it started again. Faster this time. Ranger bolted straight to the same wall. No hesitation. He pawed at the exact spot, claws raking so hard that flakes of old paint broke off and scattered like dry snow. His breaths came short, almost panicked. His whines turned sharper. "Jesus, buddy," Ethan murmured, stunned. "You're gonna break your damn paws." But he didn't stop him this time. Not right away. Instead, he pulled out his phone. The video was shaky at first, his hand trembling just enough to make the footage flicker. He zoomed in on the wall, then on Ranger's frantic paws. The baseboard was now visibly worn, scraped raw in a way no one could ignore. "Vet's gonna want to see this," he said aloud to no one. Ranger paused just long enough to glance at him, panting, then resumed, undeterred. Ethan finally stepped in and knelt beside him, placing both hands on his partner's shoulders. "Hey," he said gently. "That's enough." The dog froze muscles tight, body vibrating beneath Ethan's hands. For a second, neither of them moved. The old pipes in the wall groaned. Rain tapped at the window like someone too polite to knock. Then Ranger leaned into him just slightly and let out a long, shaking sigh. Ethan didn't say anything else. He clipped the leash back on and walked him slowly back to the kennel wing. But his mind was racing. Something was buried behind that wall. Something Ranger knew they hadn't seen. By 9:30 the next morning, Ethan stood in the chief's office, the video playing silently on Harper's desktop monitor. Chief Lena Harper didn't speak right away. Her fingers were steepled beneath her chin, and her eyes, sharp gray, didn't flicker from the screen until the clip ended. She hit pause. The frame froze on Ranger's front paws, blood just beginning to appear along the claws. "You said this was the second night?" she asked flatly. "Yes, ma'am," Ethan said. "Same exact behavior, same spot, same urgency." Harper exhaled through her nose. Her office was Spartan, clinical files stacked in columns, blinds drawn, a single photo of her late brother in uniform, the only hint of sentiment. Dr. Kim's last evaluation flagged early cognitive decline, she said without looking at him. Ethan's jaw flexed. "And this is how we're diagnosing it now? Scratching a wall he's never once touched in 7 years? He's 7.5, Ethan. That's elderly for a K9. You've seen it before: compulsive behavior, disorientation, phantom stimuli. It tracks." Ethan shook his head, jaw tight. "This isn't confusion. This is intentional." She leaned back in her chair. "The city's auditing our budget next quarter. K9 units are on the list, especially those nearing mandatory retirement. I can't justify keeping a working dog on active duty with signs like this." Ethan said nothing. "I'm filing for voluntary retirement on Ranger's behalf," she continued. "If you want to get ahead of it, now's the time. We can do it clean." His voice was low when he finally spoke. "So that's it. I'm trying to protect your legacy, and his." Ethan looked down, his hands curled into fists. "He's trying to tell us something," he said, "and no one's listening." There was a long silence. Then Harper pushed a single sheet of paper across the desk. "Dr. Kim's official recommendation is here. Read it. Sit with it. I'll wait until Friday before processing anything final." He didn't pick it up, just turned and left. That night, Ethan sat on his porch with a bottle of beer and Ranger curled at his feet. The dog had eaten but moved slower, his body stiff from overexertion. Ethan reached down, scratched gently behind his ears. "I don't know what's behind that damn wall," he muttered. "But I know one thing. You've never been wrong." Ranger didn't react, just rested his chin across Ethan's boot. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. And somewhere in the building, Ethan had called home for half his life. A truth, scratched to be heard, waited in silence. The third night, it didn't just rain. It poured. Thunder rolled across the hills like a slow drumbeat, and lightning cracked through the sky in brief, electric confessions. Inside the Elmridge PD, the storm made the old building groan pipes rattled, window frames shuddered, and water tapped against the skylights like fingers in warning. Ethan Cole stood in the corridor alone. He didn't know why he hadn't gone home yet. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was instinct. But as the storm deepened, he found himself drifting toward the old evidence room again, like some part of him had surrendered to a truth his mind hadn't caught up with. Ranger walked beside him without a leash. His steps were slower tonight, his limp more pronounced. But his eyes, those amber eyes, were lit with something that bordered on desperation, as if the wall was calling him. Or worse, something behind it was. They turned the corner. The moment the door opened, Ranger surged forward, all hesitation gone. He slammed into the wall, pawing harder, faster, more violently than either night before. The sound was sickening raw nails against drywall, the dull thud of bone against studs. Blood smeared the paint. Dark red lines streaked downward in uneven trails. "Ranger, stop! Stop! You're hurting yourself!" Ethan dropped to his knees, grabbing the dog's shoulders, trying to pull him away. But Ranger didn't growl, didn't snap, didn't resist. He simply leaned harder into the wall, one final paw raised in pleading. A low, shivering whine escaped his throatless, like an animal noise, and more like grief. Ethan's chest tightened. He wrapped both arms around the dog, holding him close, feeling the tremble in his frame. The heat, the pulse, the need. "I don't know what you want me to see," Ethan whispered, voice breaking. "But I believe you, partner. I do." Behind them, the door creaked open. "You weren't going to tell anyone about that, huh?" Ethan turned to find Officer Talia Nguyen standing in the doorway, her damp hair pulled into a bun, uniform half soaked from the rain. She held a tablet in one hand. The storm had knocked out several routers she'd come in to troubleshoot the dispatch server. And she'd seen the security cam feed in the hallway. She'd watched it in real time. "I've seen dogs act out," she said, stepping closer, her eyes locked on the smear of blood on the wall. "But that's not random." Ethan said nothing, just nodded. Talia knelt beside Ranger, reaching gently to examine his paws. Her hands were calm, clinical. But her face said this matters. "Split the pads, torn claws. He won't stop until he breaks himself," she muttered, almost to herself. "We can't let that happen." "I sent the video to Dr. Kim," Ethan said, hoarse. "No response yet." "I don't need a vet to tell me what this is." Talia looked up. "It's pattern-based behavior. Repetitive, localized, same corner, same hour. This isn't dementia. It's focus. He's trying to isolate something." She rose, brushing drywall dust from her knees. "You ever scanned this section?" "Never had a reason." "You do now." Talia left the room for a moment and returned with a compact thermal scanner from the evidence locker 1 she'd requisitioned for an unrelated drug bust months ago. She calibrated it quickly, then ran it across the wall, slow and steady. A beat, then a beep. Denser material, right where Ranger had been clawing. She looked up, eyes wide. "There's something behind here." Ethan's breath hitched. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it was just fire-damaged studs or forgotten insulation or an old pipe. But in that second, under the humming light, with Ranger's blood on the wall and the storm hammering above, it felt like something sacred had been touched. "You still think it's just confusion?" Talia asked quietly. Ethan met her gaze. "No, I don't." They stood there in silence for a moment, as Ranger finally sat, chest heaving, bloodied paws trembling. Talia opened her tablet and began documenting. "Look," she said, voice more businesslike now. "I can talk to Harper, back this up with data. She might still shut it down, but at least it'll slow the paperwork." Ethan nodded, his voice distant. "She gave me until Friday." "Then we start now." She turned to leave, but paused at the door. "You know what's strange?" she said. "Dogs don't understand time the way we do. They don't mark days on a calendar, but they know when something's wrong in a place. They carry memory in their bones." Ethan looked at Ranger, who now stared at the wall, not exhausted, not scared, but waiting for him to listen. "Then let's listen," Ethan said, because if his partner had one last story to tell, one more secret to dig up before the world silenced him, then Ethan would follow him into the dark. It was just past midnight when the three of them stood in front of the wall. The storm had passed, but the hallway still smelled of damp concrete and old electricity. A single fluorescent light above flickered with a faint buzz, casting shadows that twitched like something alive. Ranger lay nearby, his bandaged paws tucked beneath his chest, head raised, amber eyes watching like he'd been waiting for this moment all along. Talia Nguyen adjusted the strap of her duty belt and glanced sideways at Ethan. "You're sure this is the spot?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. He reached out and placed his hand on the wall. The paint was chipped where Ranger had clawed it raw. A dull smear of dried blood still clung to the corner, untouched since last night. "I don't think he's ever been more sure of anything," Ethan finally said. The third figure among them, Sam Morales, the night janitor, stood with his mop like a cane, leaning slightly forward with one hip cocked and the air of a man who'd seen a lot and said little. Sam had been with the department for 25 years, always quiet, always invisible. But when Ethan called and asked him to meet after hours off the books, he showed up with nothing more than a thermos of black coffee and a tired smile. "You know," Sam said, rubbing his chin, "this part of the wall wasn't always like that." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "No?" "Nope. After the fire in '08, they tore out a whole section back here. Smoke damage, flooding from the busted sprinklers. Took 'em 3 weeks to patch it. I remember 'cause I was the one cleaning up after the contractor crew. That corner," he pointed to the exact spot Ranger had fixated on, "that's newer drywall. Didn't used to be there." Talia turned toward him. "You're sure?" "Sure as I am that mop water and fluorescent light don't mix." Ethan shot her a look. He's not joking. Sam's memory's better than half the digital records in this place. Sam gave a little bow, mock gracious. "My curse." Talia knelt, running her fingers gently along the seam where paint met baseboard. Her brow furrowed. "It's subtle," she murmured, "but now that I'm looking, different texture. Slight variation in paint sheen. See that?" Ethan crouched beside her. "Damn. Never noticed." She stood, unzipping the bag she'd slung over her shoulder and pulling out a compact handheld scanner. It looked like a cross between a stud finder and a portable radar custom-built, calibrated by Talia herself. "This'll detect density irregularities up to 4 inches deep. Not X-ray level, but good enough to flag anything suspicious." Sam whistled softly. "Technology's gotten fancy." Talia grinned. "And underfunded. I built this one myself. Don't tell the budget committee." Ethan chuckled, but his face returned to tension as she powered it on and aimed it at the wall. The soft whir of the device filled the room. A faint blue light pulsed against the surface as she swept it slowly left to right. Then, beep, she froze. Another sweep, beep, same spot. "Talk to me," Ethan said. "There's something solid," she whispered, "right here, between the studs. At least 8 inches tall, maybe 4 wide. Too small to be a pipe, too rectangular for debris." Sam leaned in. "Could be an old lockbox. We had some of those for witness materials back in the day." Ethan's jaw tightened. "And nobody ever thought to check it after the fire?" Sam shrugged. "The rebuild was fast. Sloppy. Chief back then just wanted the wing reopened. A few things got forgotten." Talia moved back and looked at Ethan. "This isn't random. Ranger wasn't reacting to mold or wiring. He's been trying to tell us there's something here, something hidden." Ranger gave a low whuff from behind them, as if in agreement. Ethan looked at the wall, really looked at it. For years, that corner had blended into the background noise of his life. Just another surface, another coat of paint over the things no one wanted to remember. And yet, here they were. 3 people standing in silence, staring at what the rest of the department had literally built over. "We need to open it," he said finally. Talia raised an eyebrow. "You know what that means? Property damage, chain of custody, violation of evidence protocol." Ethan recited it like scripture. Then his voice softened. "But if we go through channels, someone will shut this down before we ever get a crowbar near it." Sam hesitated. "You think someone's still watching this wall after all these years?" "I think someone was scared enough to bury whatever's behind it," Ethan said. And scared people don't forget. Talia nodded slowly. Then we do this clean. Quiet. Just us. No chatter on the radio. No files touched. And if it turns out to be nothing, then I'll take the hit. He looked down at Ranger. The dog hadn't moved from his spot, but his body was tense, eyes locked on the wall like a soldier holding a final line. No, Ethan murmured. We'll take the hit. Ranger's tail moved once, slow and deliberate. Sam handed over a flathead screwdriver from the janitor cart, his voice a whisper. Well, boys, and girl, let's see what's behind curtain number 1. And as the first edge of paint cracked beneath Ethan's hand, something deeper than curiosity stirred in the room, something that smelled like old grief, hidden sins, and justice that had waited too long in the dark. The first slice through the drywall came with a breath Ethan didn't realize he'd been holding. Talia worked methodically, careful not to crack beyond the beam line. Sam Morales held a small flashlight, steady from above, illuminating the shadowed seams as gypsum gave way in soft crumbles. Ranger lay a few feet back, paws outstretched, his breathing shallow but steady. The bandages on his feet had bled through, but he hadn't made a sound, not since they started. It felt like a moment held outside of time. No radios, no chatter, just the hum of anticipation and the low crackle of history about to give way. Last inch, Talia whispered. The section of wall came loose in her hands like a secret that had waited too long to be told. Behind it, nestled snug between the beams and layered in dust so fine it looked like ash, was a steel lockbox. Matte, black, compact, heavy. No keyhole, just a tarnished latch and a name etched faintly across the top in worn, nearly invisible engraving. A.L. Talia exhaled. Adrian Locke. Sam let out a soft, reverent whistle. 15 years. And no one knew this was here. Ethan stared at the box without moving. He didn't hide it. He buried it. Ranger shifted behind them, ears lifting as if he, too, recognized something in the air, something solemn, sacred. His body leaned forward, gaze locked on the box like a guardian recognizing its post. Talia reached out but paused, hand hovering inches above the metal. "You sure?" she asked Ethan quietly. He nodded. She opened it. The latch gave easily with a click, like it had been waiting to be opened, not locked. The lid lifted with a muted creak. Inside, time stared back at them. Neatly arranged were evidence bags, yellowed slightly with age but sealed. Each was labeled in blocky, precise handwriting. Inside, clippings of hair, faded Polaroids, dirt-caked buttons, a child's bracelet with a cracked charm, a plastic hair comb snapped in half, a red ribbon stained dark along one edge. There were photographs 3, to be exact, each of a little girl. The ink had begun to fade, but the eyes still pierced through. One girl smiled with a jack-o'-lantern grin, missing her front teeth. Another wore a tiara too big for her head. The third didn't smile. She stared straight into the lens, as if daring someone to forget her. Beneath the photos lay a folded letter, handwritten, no envelope, just the words, "To whoever finds this." Talia picked it up gently, her gloved hands trembling. Ranger let out a quiet chuff, not a bark, but something more primitive, like a sound from deep within the chest, a warning or a recognition. Ethan crouched and opened the letter. His eyes scanned the first few lines, then he began to read aloud, voice steady, though something inside him twisted with every word. If you're reading this, then I'm either gone or no longer trusted. I pray it's not the latter. The contents of this box were pulled from a case I could never solve. One I was told to walk away from. One I couldn't let go. 3 girls, 3 families, only 2 bodies. The third, I believe she's still out there. These items were logged, documented, and then disappeared. Not misplaced, not lost, erased. Someone in this department, someone with power ensured they were never used. I couldn't let that be the end. If I'm wrong, burn this. If I'm right, then God help you. Because if they buried the truth this deep, they won't hesitate to bury anyone who tries to dig it up. Detective Adrian Locke. The room was silent when Ethan finished. No one moved. Even Sam, who had seen every corner of this building cleaned and repainted a dozen times over, stood with a look on his face like he'd just watched a ghost pass through the wall. Talia placed the letter back inside the box like it was a fragile artifact. Then Ethan knelt, lifted the box with both hands, and placed it on the floor. Ranger moved immediately, rising with slow, deliberate effort and taking position beside it. Head up, shoulders squared. His gaze never left the contents. He didn't whimper. He didn't bark. He simply stood guard. Like he'd known all along that whatever was behind that wall didn't just need to be found. It needed to be witnessed. And that night, in the dim fluorescent glow of a forgotten storage room, history exhaled. Because truth doesn't stay buried forever. Not when a dog with bleeding paws won't stop scratching at the wall to bring it back. The evidence box sat open on the folding table, untouched since the moment they found it. No one had dared move anything inside, not the comb, not the blood-stained ribbon, not the photographs. Ranger remained curled beside the table, eyes half closed as if standing vigil over something sacred. Ethan hadn't said much in the last hour. He sat alone now in the report room adjacent to the evidence wing, the only light coming from the desk lamp that cast a golden halo over the page in front of him. Adrian Locke's letter. He read it again, and again. Each word felt heavier than the last. Someone in this department, someone with power ensured they were never used. I couldn't let that be the end. Ethan leaned back in his chair, the old wood creaking beneath his weight. His fingers, stained faintly with dust and old ink, rested on the table's edge. His badge felt heavier on his chest tonight, not from duty, but from shame. He knew the case Locke had referred to, everyone in Elm Ridge did. 15 years ago, 3 girls had vanished in the spring: Emma Talbot, Rebecca Lynn, and Lila Grace. It started with Emma, 9 years old, last seen walking home from piano lessons 2 blocks from her house. 2 weeks later, Rebecca, 10, disappeared outside the corner store. By the time Lila, age 8, went missing from the elementary school playground, the town was in full panic. 2 months after that, Emma and Rebecca's bodies were found buried in shallow graves 10 miles apart, just outside county lines. Both had signs of suffocation. Both wore the same faded red ribbon. Lila's body was never found, and with her absence came every kind of theory, runaway, trafficking, copycat killer, even a ritualistic cult. But the press called him one name only: the Ribbon Man. Back then, Ethan was still in patrol. He wasn't assigned to the task force, but he remembered the shift in the department, how tension stalked the halls like smoke you couldn't breathe through. Rumors spread, morale fractured. And then, Locke Detective Adrian Locke was suddenly off the case. Then came the suicide. Ethan never quite believed it. The official story said Locke had taken his own life in his garage. Exhaust fumes. But there'd been no note. No signs of depression. Just a detective who'd been too close to the truth. And then silence. Until now. He looked at the photos on the table again, labeled in Locke's handwriting. Emma Talbot, Rebecca Lynn, Lila Grace. Emma had that gap-toothed grin. Rebecca's eyes squinted like she was laughing. Lila was different. She wasn't smiling. Her head tilted slightly like she was listening to something no one else could hear. Her eyes, they seemed to be staring right through the lens and into the future, into now. Ethan felt the chill crawl up his spine. Talia stepped into the room quietly, a mug of hot tea in hand. "You've been in here for an hour," she said, setting it beside him. "I figured you needed something stronger than silence." "Thanks." She sat opposite him, glancing at the letter. "It's a hell of a thing." "It's worse than that," Ethan murmured. Locke knew, or he was close, and instead of protection, someone in this building made sure his voice was never heard. He looked up at her. "You get that, right? If this is real, if this stuff was erased from the official record, we're not just talking about negligence. We're talking about conspiracy." Talia nodded slowly. "I've already started pulling archived logs, access reports, evidence check-in files. Some of it's missing, deleted or corrupted. But I found one thing that doesn't sit right." She handed him a printed sheet. Ethan scanned it. Chain of custody transfer, evidence sealed by Locke, then marked as lost 3 days later, logged by Officer R. Black. Ethan looked up. "Raymond Black?" "Yep. Same one now running for mayor." Ethan's jaw tightened. 15 years ago, he was just a detective. Exactly. Which means someone gave him the order. Or he did it knowing someone higher up had his back. Ranger stirred beside the table, letting out a low exhale that sounded like agreement. Talia leaned forward. This wasn't just about evidence disappearing. Someone wanted the entire narrative buried. 2 bodies were found, but the third, Lila? Maybe that was the line too far. Maybe she saw something. Maybe she knew. Ethan's mind spiraled, flashes of the past folding into now. A box hidden in a wall rebuilt after a fire. A dog who refused to walk away. A man who died alone because no one believed him. Ethan looked at Ranger again. The dog hadn't moved, but his presence felt louder than anyone in the room. "She's still out there," he whispered. Talia tilted her head. "Who?" "Lila." Ethan's voice hardened. "Dead or not, her story isn't finished." Silence settled over the room. The kind of silence that means something sacred is beginning. Outside, the wind picked up again, whispering through the cracks in the old station. Somewhere distant, a storm rumbled, but this time the thunder wasn't weather. It was warning, and this time they were listening. Chief Harper's office always smelled faintly of old books and stronger coffee. The window blinds were half closed, casting a crisscross of morning light over the collection of plaques and dusty commendations behind her. But the room felt colder than usual today. Ethan stood in front of the chief's desk, fingers curled around the edge of the metal evidence box, like it might vanish if he let go. Talia sat beside him, her laptop open, blinking cursor paused in a report she hadn't yet written. On the floor, Ranger lay stretched out like a soldier at ease, but his ears were perked, eyes sharp. Chief Harper leaned back slowly in her chair, one brow lifted, arms crossed. Her eyes flicked from Ethan to the box and then back again. "You're telling me," she said finally, "that Ranger, your dog, led you to a sealed wall, and inside was a cache of evidence everyone thought had been destroyed in the 2008 fire?" Ethan didn't blink. "Yes, ma'am." "And you believe it's connected to Adrian Locke's suicide?" "I don't just believe it," Ethan said, his voice low. "I know it." Harper's jaw tightened, but she didn't interrupt. That in itself was rare. Talia tapped a few keys. "We traced the box's serial code and contents. Each item matches entries from a logged case 1169B, missing evidence from 2008. Two of the items were listed as critical to prosecution in the task force report specifically: a bracelet belonging to Lila Grace and a broken hair comb believed to carry trace DNA. "And yet," Harper said slowly, "those items were declared missing 3 days before Locke's death." She leaned forward now, fingertips tapping the surface of her desk. "I'll admit, that's not a coincidence." "It's a cover-up," Ethan said bluntly. "Someone made Locke the fall guy, and now we've found what he died trying to protect." Harper glanced down at the open folder, scanning the photos. "The comb, the ribbon, the bracelet." She exhaled sharply. "Jesus!" Silence held the room. Only Ranger's tail thumped once against the floor, as if he too needed them to acknowledge it. This mattered. Harper finally stood, her posture tall but weary. She walked to the window, adjusting the blinds with 2 fingers. "Do you have any idea what this means?" she asked quietly. "Yes," Ethan replied. "That someone in this building buried a case involving the death of children and a detective was silenced for getting too close." "And you're asking me to believe that after 15 years, a retired K-9 is what brought it back to the surface?" Ethan hesitated, but not out of doubt. "Yes," he said. Harper turned to face them again. Her eyes weren't skeptical anymore. They were tired, calculating. "This doesn't leave this room," she said. Talia straightened. "Chief?" "Not yet," Harper cut her off, voice firm. "If you're right, if this box is real, then the person responsible is either long gone or still here. And if they've buried one box, they've buried more. I won't start an in-house firestorm on a hunch and a rusted latch." Ethan exhaled, nodding. She had a point. A storm this big couldn't be rushed. "I'll run a quiet audit on who accessed those logs back then," Harper added. "You two work the box. Nothing digital, no emails, no upload to the system, printouts only. I'll lock hard copies in my safe." Talia closed her laptop without a word. She knew how to move in silence. "Anything else?" Harper asked. Ethan hesitated. "Yeah." He pulled out a sealed plastic slip inside, Locke's handwritten letter. "The one addressed to whoever finds this." Harper took it. Her hands didn't shake, but her jaw clenched once then again. She didn't read it aloud. Instead, she held it for a long moment before nodding. "I worked with Adrian Locke," she said, voice quieter now. "He was honest, stubborn as hell. Always fought upstream, even when no one backed him." "He didn't deserve what happened," Ethan said. "No," she agreed. "He didn't." A silence settled again, heavier this time, as if the walls themselves were listening, remembering. Harper cleared her throat. "Keep me updated. And Cole—" "Yes, Chief?" "Don't let your emotions cloud your judgment. This town has a long memory and a short fuse. You make one wrong move and this whole thing collapses." Ethan nodded. "Understood." As they left the office, the hall outside felt different, like a shadow had shifted. Not gone. Just watching. Talia walked a half-step behind Ethan, her voice low. "You think she really believes us?" "She didn't have to say it," Ethan replied. "But yeah, she does." They reached the stairs. Ranger padded beside them, tail swaying slightly. "You realize," Talia added, "if that box sat in that wall for 15 years and Locke hit it right before dying, that means he knew someone was coming for him." Ethan paused at the bottom step, eyes darkening. "Yeah," he murmured, "and now they'll know we're coming for them." Behind them, Ranger stopped, his gaze lingering on the wall, as if the ghost of Locke himself had just passed through. The Grace house sat at the edge of Elmridge like it was holding its breath, just far enough from downtown to be forgotten, just close enough to remember everything. Paint peeled from the porch rails. The swing creaked in the breeze, moving on its own like it remembered a child who used to laugh there. The garden was overgrown, but someone had tried recently to clear a path. Ethan parked at the curb without saying a word. Talia glanced at him but didn't speak either. They both knew this visit wasn't about evidence. It was about truth, the kind no one dared to write in reports. Ranger leapt down from the back seat with a soft grunt. He didn't bark. He didn't wag. He just looked at the house like he already knew what waited behind the door. Margaret Grace opened it before they even knocked. She was smaller than Ethan remembered. Or maybe it was the way time hollowed people from the inside. Her hair had faded into a soft gray, pulled back in a braid. Her face was lined not from age but from surviving something no parent ever should. She looked at Ranger first, then Ethan, and finally Talia. Her eyes moving slowly, cautiously, like someone expecting bad news, all over again. "You found something," she said. It wasn't a question. Ethan nodded. She stepped aside. "Come in." The living room was quiet, warm, lived in. Old photographs filled every wall. Lila was in most of them. Big brown eyes, crooked grin, wild curls. A child who had once been someone's whole world. Margaret sat in her armchair and gestured toward the worn couch. Ethan didn't sit. He knelt beside the coffee table and opened the padded envelope slowly, carefully, as if the air might break what was inside. He placed the bracelet down gently. Margaret didn't move. The bracelet was simple. A slender pink band, tiny silver heart charm dangling from it. On the heart, barely worn from time, "To Lila, 10. For a moment the room was silent. So silent Ethan could hear Ranger's breathing behind him. Then Margaret's hand flew to her mouth, and she let out a sound no adult should ever have to make. It wasn't a cry. It was deeper, older, a voice from the soul clawing its way out. She reached out, fingers trembling, but didn't touch the bracelet. Not yet. "That's hers," she whispered. "I had it made the week before she turned 10. Special order. She wore it even in the bathtub, refused to take it off." Her hand finally landed on the charm. She held it as if holding Lila herself. "I begged them," she said, eyes clouded with memory. "I begged them to reopen the case, to look again. I told them she wouldn't have just disappeared. She loved this town. She loved her friends. She was kind. But they said it was just a runaway. Said the body would turn up eventually. That I should make peace." Margaret looked at Ethan now, tears glistening but not falling. "Was I wrong to keep hoping?" Ethan shook his head. "No, ma'am. You were the only one who was right to." Margaret turned to Ranger. He had padded over without a sound, Now he sat beside her, staring up, not as a dog, but as something more, something ancient and gentle. Without asking, he laid his head in her lap. She crumbled. Her fingers sank into his thick fur. And for the first time in what must have been years, Margaret Grace cried not with the rage of grief, but with the release of being believed. "I never forgot her," she said softly, to no one and everyone. "I used to think I'd see her walking down the sidewalk, arms full of library books. Sometimes I'd wake up thinking I heard her humming in the kitchen. Isn't that mad? 15 years and you still hear them like they're in the next room." Talia's voice came quietly. "It's not mad. It's love." Margaret smiled, a broken, aching smile. The town moved on, built new buildings, paved new roads, pretended like it didn't happen, like those girls were just a bad dream. But I couldn't forget. I wouldn't. Ethan finally sat, his voice low. "We think someone in the department knew. We're still piecing it together, but this bracelet is a start." She nodded slowly. "Do what you have to. Don't let them bury her again." Ranger shifted slightly but stayed close. Margaret's hand never left his fur. "Do you think she was scared?" she asked, barely a whisper. Ethan's throat tightened. He didn't want to guess, didn't want to lie, but he answered as truthfully as he could. "I think, whatever happened, she knew someone would come looking. She had a mother who never gave up. And now she has a partner who won't let go." He looked down at Ranger. "Neither of you ever stopped." Margaret finally looked at the bracelet again. "This doesn't bring her back," she said. "But it proves she was real, that she mattered, that someone tried to silence her and failed." She glanced up, voice steady now. "Bring her home, Officer Cole." "I will," he promised. "That's a promise from both of us." Ranger thumped his tail once in agreement. Outside, the wind picked up slightly. It rustled the swing on the porch. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed twice. And in that small room of grief and grit and silent hope, the case wasn't just reopened. It was remembered. The envelope sat atop Ethan's desk like it didn't belong there. It was thick, ivory-colored, and sealed with a wax crest, a gold W embedded in the center. No return address. Just his name typed neatly across the front. No rank, no department. Just Ethan Cole. He stared at it longer than he should have. Talia walked in with 2 coffees and paused. "That looks expensive." "It is," he said, voice flat. He broke the seal with a slow rip and unfolded the invitation inside. It was printed on textured cardstock, the kind used for weddings or political fundraisers. The typography was elegant, almost pretentious. "Mr. Charles Whitford cordially invites you to the Elmridge Foundation Gala, benefiting youth outreach and community renewal." Date, time, location, his personal estate, of course. Dress code, formal. At the bottom, a handwritten note in blue ink. "Hope you'll join us. Been too long. Would love to catch up. C.W." Ethan's jaw tightened. Talia sat across from him, watching his reaction like a chess player reading an opponent's move. "You think it's bait?" she asked. Ethan set the invitation down with more force than necessary. "I think it's a warning." Talia sipped her coffee, then shrugged. "Or a show of power. Guys like Whitford don't just invite people they don't like. They invite the ones they want to intimidate publicly." "He was a person of interest 15 years ago," Ethan muttered. "Had access to the park, knew all the victims through sponsorships." then somehow got cleared within a week. You don't forget details like that. He also donated 6 figures to the department's rebuilding fund after the 2008 fire, Talia added, which, incidentally, made evidence room access a little loose. They exchanged a look. The timing was too precise to be coincidence. First the bracelet, then the box, now this. Ranger, curled up beneath the desk, gave a soft, low growl. Ethan reached down and rested a hand on the dog's back. He remembers. Talia glanced at the invitation again. Do you? Ethan sighed. Whitford always had a way of making people feel small in his presence. Even when he smiled, it felt like he was measuring you, figuring out which lever to pull. She leaned forward. Then maybe we give him something to measure. Ethan frowned. You want to go? I want to see who's watching who, she said calmly. A man like Whitford doesn't invite a cop who just uncovered sealed evidence unless he's trying to send a message. Ethan looked back at the card. The handwritten note burned more than the printed words. Been too long. Yeah. Too long since 2 girls were found dumped near an abandoned trail. Too long since the third, Lila Grace, disappeared without a trace. Too long since Adrian Locke turned a bullet on himself, 2 weeks after being pulled off the investigation. Talia stood, folding her arms. You go, I go. That's the deal. He looked at her. She wasn't bluffing. Talia Nguyen was smart, sharp, and loyal. Exactly the kind of partner you needed when the lines between politics and justice blurred. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. Fine, but we don't go in loud. No uniforms, no badges. She smirked. What? You don't want to ruin the party? I don't want to get thrown out before dessert. Ranger rose slowly, stretching. His movements were slower these days, more deliberate. But his eyes were sharp, unblinking, watching the envelope like it held something poisonous. Talia noticed. He doesn't like it either. Good, Ethan said. Then we're all on the same page. He picked up the invitation again, but this time his hand didn't shake. Instead, he smiled a small, bitter smile born not of fear, but of preparation. This isn't a gala, he said softly. It's a chessboard. Talia tapped her finger on the desk. Then let's make the next move count. As she turned to leave, she hesitated at the door. You know, you could have ignored it, pretended you never got it. I could have, Ethan said, but that's not what Locke would have done. Behind him, Ranger let out a short huff like an agreement made without words. Outside, the sky over Elmridge began to darken, a thick sheet of gray rolling over the rooftops. Somewhere in a mansion of glass and marble, Charles Whitford likely poured himself a drink, smiled into a mirror, and assumed the game was his. But what he didn't count on, what none of them counted on, was a tired old cop, a tech-savvy officer, and a German shepherd with blood on his paws and memories like anchors. The gala wasn't the end. It was the door. And they were already walking through it. The blue glow of the evidence room's auxiliary monitors flickered like tired eyes. Talia Nguyen leaned in closer, her face half illuminated by the soft screen light, the other half lost in shadow. Outside the police department's archive server room, the night was quiet, but in here, history whispered through corrupted files. Lines of code scrolled across her terminal, and she barely blinked. Ethan stood behind her, arms crossed, eyes drifting to the small crack near the baseboard where Ranger lay with his head on his paws. The old dog had stopped scratching, but his gaze remained locked on that corner of the room, as if listening for something buried. I've cross-checked the original case logs with the citywide backups, stored on the judicial server, Talia said, not looking up. They don't match. Ethan's voice was low. How bad is it? She hit a key. The screen filled with 2 sets of documents side by side, highlighted in red and green. Testimonies redacted, officer logs rewritten, timelines shifted by days, entire interviews that were in the system 2 weeks ago gone. Ethan took a step forward. Someone deleted them? Not deleted, Talia said. Rewritten. These aren't crude edits. Whoever did this wanted it to look seamless. The digital fingerprinting is clean, but... She leaned back and cracked her knuckles. They forgot about the image data. She pulled up a folder labeled Miska Visuals 2008 Fire Recovery. Inside were hundreds of grainy photos, evidence room damage, officer notes, item logs scanned from half-burned clipboards. And then, one frame froze Ethan in place. Pause that, he whispered. Talia enlarged the image. 2 men stood near the evidence room door, surrounded by smoke and soot. One was unmistakably Charles Whitford, his signature pocket square barely visible even through the haze. The other? Raymond Black. Not the middle-aged, suit-and-smile mayoral candidate plastered across every billboard in Elmridge. This was a younger version, clean-shaven, sharp-jawed, and unmistakably present, right next to Whitford, at a scene he had publicly sworn he never entered. Ethan's heart thudded. That's not possible. In his testimony, he said he was out of state during the fire, gave sworn statements 3 times. Talia's fingers flew across the keyboard, bringing up Raymond's official travel log. Says he was speaking at a regional housing conference in Chicago, but look at the timestamp on the photo. She enlarged it. June 12th, 2008, 2:41 a.m. Fire broke out just past 2 a.m., she added. Ethan stared at the image again. Raymond wasn't just present. He wasn't just standing nearby. He was looking directly at a clipboard Locke was holding. Ranger lifted his head slightly. Just once. Then settled back down. You ever hear of Locke talking about Black? Talia asked. No, Ethan said quietly. But I remember Locke had enemies he never named. Said they played the system like chess, not war. Talia pulled up one final file deeply buried, hidden in a duplicate folder with a harmless label. PR Speeches, Past Events. It wasn't a speech. It was a scanned notebook page. Locke's handwriting, faint, faded, but still legible. RB plus CW, not just donations. Watch the way they move, the way the chief hesitates when they call. Evidence Room 3. Pay attention to the ones not asking questions. Talia exhaled. So Locke knew. Maybe not everything, but enough to start covering his tracks in case he was silenced, Ethan finished. The weight of those words hung heavy. Who do we tell? Talia asked, her voice steady but quiet. Ethan didn't answer right away. He just stared at the photo of Whitford and Black, 2 men caught in a flashbulb moment they thought history would bury in ash. No one, he finally said. Not yet. Talia turned. You're not serious. I am. We tell Harper, and this vanishes again. We go to IA, and it turns into a witch hunt we can't control. We need more, something undeniable, not just a photo. Talia considered this, then nodded. Then we dig deeper. Ethan glanced down. Ranger was still watching that same wall corner. Apparently, he said, we're not the only ones who think so. As Talia backed up the files onto an encrypted drive, she asked the question neither of them wanted to say aloud. What if Locke really did leave everything behind? All the evidence, all the dots waiting for someone to finally connect them. Ethan looked at the screen again. The names, the redacted statements, the smiling faces frozen in firelight. Then maybe it's time we start playing chess. The night janitor, Sam Morales, stood in the dim hallway of the old records wing, arms folded tight against his chest like he was holding something in. He hadn't aged much in the face, but his eyes told a different story. They darted to the scorched ceiling, then back to the wall where the smoke stains still bled faintly through the new paint, like the building refused to forget. "I didn't think anyone still cared about that night," he muttered. "Hell, I barely talk about it anymore." Ethan nodded beside him. Talia stood a few paces away, flashlight in hand. Behind them, Ranger sniffed along the floor, methodical, nose twitching, tail rigid, not wagging. "What do you remember, Sam?" Ethan asked, voice low. Sam stared at the old metal door labeled Storage, Room 3. The handle had long since been replaced, but the outline of heat warping still rippled around the frame. "I was doing my rounds. Midnight shift. Same as every night. Back then, I still wore the badge part-time," Sam said. "Locke was already down here. Said he needed to check something in the evidence room alone. That wasn't out of the ordinary. He was paranoid like that." He exhaled. "Then I smelled the smoke." Talia glanced at Ethan. "Where exactly did it start?" "Back corner of room 3. The furnace panel used to be there before renovations. Old ductwork. Probably hadn't been cleaned in decades." Sam pointed toward the base of the far wall, where a faint line of discoloration ran upward like a vertical scar. "I rushed in, saw flames licking up the back wall. Not big yet, but hot enough to push you back. I yelled, grabbed the extinguisher. Locke, he wasn't putting it out." Ethan frowned. What was he doing? Sam's voice caught in his throat. He was protecting something. The silence settled hard after that. "I remember him crouched by the furnace panel, arms spread wide like he was blocking someone from getting close, like the fire wasn't even real to him, just noise. He was guarding it. Whatever was behind it." Ranger let out a soft whine. Ethan stepped closer. "And then?" "2 other officers came down. One grabbed me, said I had to evacuate. Protocol. The smoke was getting thick. But when I looked back, someone had Locke by the arm, dragging him away." "Who?" Talia asked. Sam hesitated. "I couldn't see through the haze, but they wore a command jacket." Ethan exchanged a glance with her. "Only captains and above wore those during that period, which meant someone high up didn't want him near that wall." Ethan finished the thought. Sam looked down, jaw tight. "Next time I came back, wall had been patched. Locke was different, distant. You ever see a man go quiet so hard it echoes?" Talia turned her flashlight toward the baseboard near the furnace panel. Ranger was already there. He stood frozen paw pressed against the seam where new metal met old tile. His body taut, eyes focused like he was listening to something beneath the surface. Then scratch. One paw. Then another. Then again, faster. "Easy, boy," Ethan whispered. But Ranger wouldn't stop. Not like last time. This time it wasn't restless behavior, it was targeted. "Sam," Talia said, stepping beside him, "you're sure that's where the fire started?" He nodded. "That exact spot." She crouched, ran her hand over the panel. The metal was cooler than the rest of the room, unnaturally so. "Something's behind this." Sam hesitated, then stepped forward and touched the edge of the furnace panel. "You know, Locke once told me that truth doesn't always scream. Sometimes it hides in old ash and waits for someone brave enough to dig through the burn. Ethan kneeled beside Ranger, resting a hand gently on his back. The dog stopped scratching just for a moment and leaned into the contact, then scratched once more. Deliberate, measured, like punctuation at the end of a sentence no one had spoken aloud. Ethan looked up. "Get tools, gloves. We're opening that panel." Talia didn't ask twice. As she moved, Sam lingered at the doorway. "I always wondered why Locke never fought back harder," he said. Maybe he didn't think anyone would ever finish what he started." Ethan stared at the furnace panel. "We will," he said, "even if it kills us." And behind him, Ranger lowered his head to the ground, eyes open, still watching. Because some instincts can't be trained. They're inherited from whatever place whispers go when justice takes too long. The furnace panel groaned as Ethan pried it open with a crowbar, the metal protesting like it had been sealed with secrets, not screws. The stale scent of scorched wood and forgotten years rushed out old smoke that had never truly left. Dust rained in a fine sheet, and something else drifted with it, the faint, dry whisper of paper. Talia crouched beside him with gloved hands, flashlight in her mouth, illuminating the dark cavity inside. Ranger sat back, his head tilted. Not barking, not whining, just watching, alert, as if guarding something no one else could see. "Back there," Ethan said. He reached in slowly, the space barely large enough for a hand and forearm. His fingers brushed against cracked insulation, then something brittle. Several things, in fact, stacked loosely like they'd been shoved in hastily, almost in panic. He pulled out a bundle of papers. The edges were singed, warped by heat, and flecked with ash. A few curled at the corners like they'd tried to escape the fire but couldn't quite make it. Talia laid them gently on a tarp. "Jesus," she whispered. "They're notes." Ethan adjusted the flashlight. The handwriting was unmistakable, angular, precise, tense. He'd seen it before in Adrian Locke's old reports, but this wasn't part of any official file. These were personal observations, written on old legal pads, police forms, even the back of coffee receipts. Some pages had only a few words. "I was wrong to trust her. Third girl, she's still out there. If they find this, I'm already gone." One name came up repeatedly, scrawled in the margins like it haunted the man. S. Delacroix, sometimes underlined, sometimes circled. Once, written 3 times in a row like a silent scream, Locke couldn't let out any other way. Talia's brow furrowed. Delacroix. That name rings a bell. Ethan flipped through more pages. One had a partial letter, perhaps never sent, addressed only as, "To anyone not afraid to finish what I couldn't." Another detailed a series of contradictions in evidence logs and interview transcripts from the original case. Every irregularity pointed toward interference, someone editing the narrative from within. Then a paragraph. "Whitford is just the face. The real power lies in the courtroom. S. Delacroix shields them all. Too old to get his hands dirty now, but the blood on them never dried." Talia stood up abruptly, pulling her tablet from her bag. "Give me a sec." She tapped quickly, scrolling, eyes darting. "Delacroix? Samuel Delacroix, retired Superior Court judge. Served in this county for 32 years. Stepped down quietly in 2010, right after the fire. No press, no statement, just gone." "Connections?" Ethan asked. "Plenty. Oversaw dozens of cases involving Whitford's companies. Threw out several class action suits, citing insufficient cause." She paused. "And get this, he's Officer Hayes' father." The pieces landed hard. Ethan stared at the pages again, as if Locke's ghost was pointing with a charred finger. Ranger was poisoned with a euthanasia compound, Ethan murmured. And Hayes is the one who preps his gear. A chill settled between them. This isn't just about an old case, Talia said. It's about what that case protected. A network. Ethan looked down at Ranger. The dog met his eyes. No movement. Just presence. Locke knew, Ethan said, but he didn't run. He hid the truth in the wall and stood guard until the end. Talia placed a hand over the stack of papers. Maybe he wasn't guarding evidence, she said softly. Maybe he was guarding the chance for someone else to try again. Ethan looked up. And that someone is us. The furnace clicked faintly as the air shifted. Outside the records room, the police station buzzed on like normal phones ringing, doors creaking, officers walking their beats. But inside that scorched chamber of forgotten truths, the weight of what they had just found pressed heavy on their shoulders. Talia knelt beside Ranger and placed her palm gently on his fur. You knew. You've always known, haven't you? Ranger didn't move, just closed his eyes, as if saying, finally. The call came just after noon. Ethan had just finished rechecking the chain of custody logs when his phone buzzed, lighting up with Dr. Min Kim, K-9 Vet Services. He almost didn't answer, not because he was busy, but because something in his gut had been tightening since the second night, since the video, since the bleeding pause. Ranger had never whined, never faltered, never failed a command, until recently. Dr. Kim, Ethan answered, stepping out onto the rear balcony of the precinct. The cold metal railing stung his palm. There was a pause on the other end. A breath. Ethan, can you sit down? His stomach dropped. The air seemed thinner out here. He stayed standing. Just tell me. Kim's voice softened into something clinical but kind. We've got the results from Ranger's blood panel. There's a high count of abnormal endothelial cells. Too many markers. Ethan, I'm sorry. It's hemangiosarcoma. The world blurred slightly. He didn't ask what that meant. He already knew. You're sure? He asked. His voice came out steadier than he felt. We'll need imaging to confirm the location, but yes. The spleen is likely, or the heart. It's aggressive, silent until it's not. Most handlers don't catch it until collapse. You did. Ethan looked out over the lot behind the station, where squad cars glinted in the afternoon sun. Somewhere down there, Ranger was probably napping in his crate, paws twitching like he was chasing something in his sleep. Still alive, still fighting. How long? Ethan asked. Could be weeks, could be days. Sometimes they seem perfectly fine until... Kim trailed off. But he's showing early signs. Fatigue, disorientation, slight limping. He's been hiding it. Most working dogs do. Ethan swallowed hard. He pressed his thumb to his brow, shutting his eyes. Does he know? He whispered. Kim's voice was nearly inaudible. I think he's known longer than you have. Silence stretched between them, broken only by a distant siren and the low hum of traffic in Elmridge, a town that moved on autopilot, while somewhere in its core, Ethan felt something irreplaceable starting to slip. Ethan, Kim continued gently, I'll support whatever decision you make. Treatment's an option, but not a cure. We'd be buying time. That word. Time. Every second Ranger had given was borrowed from danger, from gunfire, smoke, collapsed buildings, cold nights in the woods, and things Ethan could never name. The idea of Buying time for him felt like trying to repay a debt in foreign currency. Not enough. Never enough. "I'll come pick up the imaging forms tomorrow," Ethan said. Then, without another word, he ended the call. He leaned against the railing, head low. His chest hurt, not the sharp kind of pain, but the dull, spreading weight of realization. He tried to breathe deep, but the air stuck in his throat. When he walked back inside, no one noticed. He didn't let them. His expression stayed blank, his posture steady. He even made a joke when Talia asked if he wanted coffee. "Only if it's strong enough to restart a dead shift." She laughed. He smiled, and that was the beginning of the lie. Back at his desk, he pulled up the surveillance footage of the evidence room again. Not the wall this time, just Ranger. He watched, frame by frame, as the dog paced, paused, pawed the brick, then circled again. Ethan had always thought of him as invincible, but now he noticed the slight tremble in Ranger's back leg, the way he leaned to one side when he sat, the flicker in his eyes, as if fighting through fog. That night, when the station emptied and the world slowed down, Ethan brought Ranger home early. He let the dog out into the backyard, then sat on the steps, beer in hand. Ranger sniffed the wind, walked a loop around the grass, then lay down next to Ethan without being called. "Hey, buddy," Ethan murmured, scratching behind the ears. Ranger leaned in gently, then settled with a soft sigh. Ethan looked up at the sky. Clouds drifted by, thin and streaked, lit from beneath by the porch light. Everything looked normal. Nothing ever looked sick, until it was too late. "I'm not ready," Ethan whispered. "Not for this. Not for you to stop being part of the noise." Ranger licked his hand. It felt like an answer. The phone rang again the next morning. Ethan's thumb hovered over the screen, hesitating when he saw Dr. Kim's name. He answered with a breath he didn't remember holding. "Ethan," Kim began, voice tense, "I need you to listen carefully. I ran a second panel." Ethan sat up straighter at his desk, the morning's report halfway typed. "Okay. We tested samples from Ranger's water bowl, his chew toy, and the padding inside his crate liner based on the materials you brought in last night. All three contained trace levels of pentobarbital, consistent with—" He didn't need Kim to finish. Ethan stood up, his chair screeching across the floor. "Euthanasia drugs," Ethan muttered, voice flat. "Someone tried to kill my dog." "I didn't want to believe it at first," Kim said, quieter now. "But the levels weren't incidental. They were embedded. Slow release. Someone was microdosing him over time." A chill spread from Ethan's spine outward like ice crawling under the skin. It wasn't just disease trying to take Ranger. It was someone with access. Someone who knew exactly how to disguise cruelty as decline. He looked through the glass window into the main hallway of the precinct. Ranger lay at his usual spot beside the locker bench, chin on paws, eyes barely open. "They wanted it to look natural," Ethan said aloud, jaw clenched. "And it almost worked," Kim confirmed. "If you hadn't brought in those samples, we might have assumed the hemangiosarcoma was acting alone. But this was deliberate." Ethan didn't respond for a long moment. Then, "Thank you, Doc." He hung up and immediately called Talia. She picked up after one ring. "You need to come to the locker room," he said. "Now." Minutes later, they stood beside Ranger, who perked up weakly when Talia crouched to rub his ears. Ethan told her everything. Kim's call, the poison, the intent. Talia's face changed quickly, fiercely. "You're saying someone's been trying to put him down under the radar." "Yeah," Ethan said. "And not just anyone. Someone with access. Someone who knew when and how. Someone who wanted him silenced before he started scratching at that wall." She stood, fists clenched. "Who had keys to the K9 gear lockers?" "Me, Harper, Dr. Kim, Officer Hayes." Talia blinked. "Hayes?" Ethan nodded. "Son of Judge Delacroix." Talia's eyes darkened. "The same Delacroix whose name keeps popping up in Locke's notes?" "Same one," Ethan said grimly. "I never liked the way Hayes looked at Ranger. Like he was just a tool. An old one." Talia walked over to the K9 cabinet and examined the gear leashes, collars, toys, meds. She pulled out a small bag of beef-flavored training treats, opened it, sniffed, and winced. "That's not right," she muttered. She grabbed a portable test strip from her kit, dabbed it on one of the treat crumbs, and waited. The strip turned pale blue, then bled into gray. "Same compound," she confirmed. "Barbiturates." Ethan exhaled slowly, fingers curling into fists. They were poisoning him and waiting for the cancer to take the blame. "Jesus," Talia whispered. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance. Inside the station, everything was too quiet, too clean, like a house where the crime had already been mopped up, leaving just the echo behind. "We tell Harper?" Talia asked. Ethan hesitated. "Not yet. Not without proof linking it to Hayes." Talia nodded. "Then we start building." Ethan kneeled beside Ranger, placing a hand on his broad back. The dog's breathing was shallow but steady, his eyes flicking up to meet Ethan's. "You held on," Ethan whispered. "You stayed loud when they wanted you silent." Ranger shifted just enough to press his head into Ethan's knee. It wasn't just loyalty anymore. It was resistance. The next morning, the station lights flickered with sterile normalcy hallways, humming with routine, paper shuffling, and the occasional ring of a distant phone. But Ethan's world had shifted. The air was thinner, tighter. It wasn't just about cancer anymore. It was betrayal. From inside the walls. He watched from his desk as Officer Derek Hayes strolled into the precinct like he always did. Coffee in one hand, K9 report binder in the other, perfectly pressed uniform, charm turned up just enough to stay forgettable. Hayes offered a nod toward Ethan as he passed. "Morning, Cole." Ethan stared at him for a moment. "Yeah. Morning." Talia entered from the side hallway a beat later, carrying 2 folders. She dropped one on Ethan's desk without a word. Inside, personnel access logs for the past 6 months, specifically keyed entries to the K9 storage. One name repeated, always within a 20-minute window of Ethan's absence. Hayes. Ethan exhaled hard, jaw flexing. He logged in under his own badge. Didn't even try to hide it. Talia looked toward the window. Hayes was now chatting up dispatch like it was just another Thursday. "Arrogance," she said. "Or confidence that nobody would dare look." Ethan opened the second folder. Judge Simon Delacroix's closed cases, collated from state archives. It read like a fortress. Declined appeals, delayed warrants, evidence suppression orders. But it was the names that stood out. Whitford, Black, Locke. A triangle of power sealed by legal immunity, and standing at the edge of that triangle like an obedient shadow, Officer Derek Hayes. Talia tapped a yellow sticky note she'd added to the top page. "Delacroix presided over the suppression hearing on the Whitford case 15 years ago," she said. "Locke objected, was overruled. A month later, Lila's file was sealed. A month after that, the fire. And Locke died not long after, Ethan murmured. Suicide, they said. They both stared at the web of names. Legacy protection, Ethan muttered. The son covering for the father, poisoning the one dog that wouldn't stop scratching at the past. A sudden knock startled them. Chief Harper stood at the door. "Cole and Gwen, my office." Inside, the mood was clipped, eyes sharp. "I reviewed your evidence request logs," Harper said, folding her arms. "You two have been digging." "We found pentobarbital in Ranger's toys," Ethan said plainly. "Intentional poisoning, slow, concealed." Harper's brow rose. "And your suspect?" "Officer Hayes." She blinked. "You're accusing a fellow officer of attempted animal murder?" Ethan nodded. "And possibly obstruction of justice in the Lila Grace case." Talia added, "We have access logs, motive, and a direct family tie to Delacroix, the judge who buried the original investigation." Harper sat back slowly, lips pursed. Then she said, "You don't bring this forward without proof that'll survive more than a whisper. If you want to move on Hayes, it needs to be airtight." Ethan nodded grimly. "We're not guessing anymore. We're closing in." Outside the office, Hayes walked past the canine wing again. Ranger lifted his head slightly from the floor, ears twitching, eyes locked on the man. Not barking, just watching. "Still got a spark in you, huh?" Hayes murmured toward the dog, crouching briefly. "Should have faded by now." His voice was low, like he thought no one could hear it. But Ranger heard, and so did Talia. She stood in the hallway behind him, silent, watching Hayes like one would a rusted blade dull on the surface, but deadly if mishandled. She waited until he left, then walked over and crouched beside Ranger. "You remembered," she whispered to him. "You remembered what evil smells like." The dog didn't move, just placed his paw over her boot, quiet, protective, like a gesture of trust. Inside the evidence room, Ethan looked over the logbook again, then at a photo clipped to one of Locke's old files. It was dated 2006, taken in front of the courthouse. 3 men shook hands in a staged gesture of civic unity: Charles Whitford, Judge Simon Delacroix, and a younger Raymond Black. And just in the background, partially cut off by the edge of the frame, stood a teenage boy in police cadet gear. Derek Hayes. Ethan flipped the photo over, written in faded blue ink. 3 faces of the future, one shadow too long. He stared at it, heart thudding with something between fear and fury. The time for speculation was over. Now they had a name, a motive, and the shape of a machine built to protect predators. And one old dog bleeding from the inside out who refused to let it be buried. The air smelled like wealth, that kind of filtered fragrance that only came from too much money and not enough truth. The Whitford estate shimmered like a palace wrapped in illusion gold railings polished to an impossible gleam, manicured topiaries carved into swans and lions, chandeliers heavy with glass that pretended to be crystal. Ethan adjusted his tie as he stepped out of the car, flanking Talia on one side, and Ranger, now suited in a sleek, formal canine vest, on the other. "You sure about this?" Talia asked under her breath, scanning the grandeur ahead. "This feels like walking into a viper nest with a 'Please bite me' sign taped to our backs." Ethan glanced at her, then down at Ranger. The dog sat, still as marble, eyes forward. "We're not here to start a fight," he said. "We're here to see who flinches first." The valet didn't even blink at the sight of the German Shepherd. Clearly, Whitford's team had anticipated their arrival. That didn't settle Ethan. It only deepened the unease that pooled behind his ribs like thick oil. Inside, the gala was a theater of masks. Strings of classical music weaved through the hall, courtesy of a live quartet, tucked beneath a marble staircase. Servers in black carried trays of crystal flutes and bite-sized privilege. Laughter artificial, overcompensating, echoed through gold-trimmed arches and velvet-draped corridors. Whitford's estate wasn't just money. It was dominance camouflaged as charm. Ranger walked at Ethan's side with professional grace. The dog's eyes scanned everything. The waiters, the feet under gowns, the wine glasses too close to belts. But for now, he was calm, watchful, not yet triggered. Talia leaned toward Ethan. "There's Raymond Black," she murmured, gesturing with a subtle nod. "Schmoozing with the DA. No cameras in sight. They planned this." Ethan's eyes narrowed. Black looked exactly like every campaign poster, only greasier. His smile stretched too far. His laughter didn't touch his eyes. "See the guy next to him?" Talia added. "That's Vernon Fells, the contractor who signed off on the remodel of the evidence room after the 2008 fire." Ethan's voice was a gravel whisper. "Of course he is." They moved through the room with slow precision, accepting no drinks, offering no smiles. Just presence. Enough to disrupt the rhythm, enough to force the masks to tighten. Then, Ranger stopped. It wasn't a big movement, barely noticeable unless you knew him, a subtle stiffening of posture, the faint rise of the hackles along his spine. His tail, normally low and calm, now hung perfectly straight, a wire drawn tight. His nose twitched, eyes locked. And then he turned slowly, deliberately toward the grand staircase. There, descending with the weight of someone who thought the floor was lucky to hold him, was Charles Whitford. Mid-60s, silver fox, with a voice like honey-dipped gravel and a handshake that had broken more deals than it had made. His tuxedo fit like armor. His expression, a masterclass in practiced disinterest only, faltered for a blink when he saw Ranger. That blink was enough. Ranger let out a single huff through his nose, not a growl, not a bark, but a signal. Ethan felt it before he saw it. Ranger recognized something. The air tightened. Whitford smiled, too slowly. "Detective Cole, Officer Nguyen." His voice oozed confidence, but Ethan heard the edge under it. "And the legendary Ranger. I've heard he's due for retirement." Ethan's jaw clenched. "He's still got good days left." Whitford's eyes twinkled like dying stars. "Let's hope not too many. I'd hate to think an old dog might get confused in a place like this." Talia stepped forward. "Funny, sir. Ranger's been more accurate than half the polygraphs in the department." Whitford chuckled. "Is that so?" He turned, gesturing them deeper into the house. "Come, join the festivities. There's an exhibit upstairs. Old town memorabilia. I thought it might interest the historians among you." Ethan exchanged a glance with Talia. "He's baiting us." And still, they followed, because predators didn't attack in the open. They cornered. They climbed the grand staircase under crystal light. At the top, down a velvet-lined hall, they entered a library. Wall-to-wall books, mahogany shelves, first editions that probably hadn't been opened since the Reagan administration. Ranger sniffed the air, stopped again. His nose lifted. Then, without warning, he crossed the room and placed a single paw against the middle shelf on the left wall, and scratched. Once. Then again. Soft, controlled, but deliberate. Ethan's pulse spiked. Ranger didn't false positive, not here, not now. Whitford turned, smiling, but the edges of his calm had splintered. "I didn't realize dogs were bibliophiles." "He's more of a truth hound," Ethan said evenly, stepping toward the shelf. "Seems your library smells familiar." Whitford moved fast, too fast for a man his age. He reached for a drawer near the fireplace. Ranger growled. Not low. Not subtle. It was the sound of warning drawn in teeth and memory. Whitford froze fingers just inches from something metal glinting in the drawer. "Leave it," Ethan said, hand already drifting toward the inside of his jacket. The room was a powder keg. Then Whitford stepped back, slowly raising both hands. "Very well, Detective. You've made your presence known. But remember dogs age. Memories fade, and institutions forget." Ethan stepped between him and Ranger. "Maybe. But some things don't forget. Some things don't stop scratching." They turned to leave, but not before Ethan reached out, pulled a book from the shelf, and felt the false backing give way with a subtle click. What lay behind it would wait for the next scene. Ranger's paw dragged across the wood again, this time harder. The faint scratch echoed too loud in the hushed elegance of the study. Mahogany bookshelves lined the room like cathedral walls, each title carefully curated leather-bound testaments to status. But the dog wasn't looking for wisdom. He was hunting memory. Ethan watched closely. Ranger's eyes locked on the shelf in the center third row, fourth column. Then came the signal, a quiet growl deep in the throat. Not aggressive, focused, familiar. "He's alerting," Ethan said quietly to Talia. She moved beside him, one hand already grazing the concealed holster at her hip. "Same spot he hit before. He's onto something." Ethan stepped forward and ran his fingers along the row of spines. The books didn't sit quite right, too snug, too untouched. He leaned in. One volume, Maritime Law and Sovereign Ethics, had no dust on its top edge. Odd, in a room this pristine. He pulled. Click. The faintest mechanical sigh sounded from behind the shelf. A latch. Ranger stepped back. A panel popped loose, just enough for Ethan to slip his fingers behind it and tug. The entire section of shelving slid open an inch with a whispering scrape. Behind it was a hidden alcove no bigger than a shoebox. Inside, resting on a velvet square, was a silver locket. Old, worn, the clasp slightly bent. It trembled under the room's chandelier light like it had something to confess. Talia stepped closer, breath catching. "It's engraved." Ethan lifted it gently. On the back, in a faded script, L.G. 2 letters. One name, Lila Grace. Time stopped. Ranger sat perfectly still, eyes fixed on the locket as if it carried scent even memory couldn't erase. For a brief second, the room felt colder-like. The presence of something unresolved had entered. Then, "Put that down." Charles Whitford's voice dropped the temperature another 5 degrees. He stepped forward from the doorway, where he'd silently returned. Hands no longer raised, expression no longer composed. "You're trespassing," he said, eyes dark, voice tight. Ethan didn't move. "You invited us. To the gala, not my private study. You left the door open. I assumed even mongrels knew manners." Ranger didn't growl. He didn't have to. The silence said enough. Talia narrowed her eyes. "You want to explain why a dead girl's locket is hidden behind a false bookcase in your home, Mr. Whitford?" Whitford chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. It was gifted to me. By her mother. After the funeral. There was no funeral, Ethan said, gaze hard. Lila's body was never found. Whitford's jaw ticked. Then he did something neither of them expected. He stepped toward his desk calm, calculated, and reached for the bottom drawer. No sudden moves, Ethan warned, already lifting his jacket flap. What's in the drawer? Proof, Whitford said smoothly, that you're wasting your time. But his hand moved too fast. Ethan didn't wait. He drew his weapon, leveled it. Hands where I can see them. Talia was right behind him, gun drawn, eyes trained. Step away from the drawer. Whitford froze. For a heartbeat, it felt like the world stood still. Then Ranger took a single step forward, low and quiet, ears twitching, not at the man, but at what lay inside that drawer. Move, and he goes for the throat, Ethan said, cold steel in his tone. Whitford slowly raised his hands. You think you know what you're doing, he sneered, but you're playing in a world built on old handshakes and deep pockets. We're playing for Lila Grace, Talia replied. And you just ran out of smoke to hide behind. Ethan stepped forward and opened the drawer himself. Inside, a small pistol, unregistered, and beneath it, a second velvet box. Inside that box, Polaroids of girls, young, unaware, at what looked like private gatherings, all dated, all signed by someone with initials, D.C. Talia's breath hitched. Delacroix? She whispered. Ethan nodded grimly. This goes deeper than Whitford. He turned back to the man who had for years hosted fundraisers for missing children, while hiding a dead girl's locket behind his bookshelf. You're under arrest, Ethan said. Whitford didn't protest, didn't move, just smiled, a crooked, bitter thing. You don't understand the game. We're not here to play, Ethan said. We're here to end it. Ethan barely registered the movement. Whitford's right hand twitched, subtle, rehearsed, and deadly. In one practiced flick, the man lunged back toward the drawer. He had a second weapon. Talia shouted, "Gun!" Just as the glint of polished steel caught the chandelier's light, the room erupted into motion. Ethan moved first instinct, older than thought. He shoved Talia aside just as Whitford raised the weapon and fired. Crack! A shot tore through the room, echoing off mahogany and marble. Pain flared white-hot through Ethan's shoulder, sharp, searing, like a brand. He staggered. But Whitford had made a far graver mistake. He ignored the dog. Ranger launched from his place by the bookshelf in a blur of muscle and fury. No bark, just motion, just intent. Fangs met forearm with a crack of bone and a scream that shattered Whitford's composure. The gun clattered to the floor. Whitford went down hard, Ranger on top, growling low and guttural, a sound that came from somewhere beneath years of silence. The growl of every unsolved case, every unanswered cry, every girl never brought home. "Ranger, off!" Ethan gasped, clutching his shoulder, blood soaking through his shirt. Ranger didn't let go right away. Not until Whitford stopped struggling. Not until justice had teeth. Talia moved in, weapon raised. "Don't you dare move!" she hissed at Whitford, who was now sobbing, cradling his bleeding arm. Then a new voice entered the room, calm, firm, and unmistakably resolute. "Step away, Mr. Whitford. You're done." Patricia Wells. The name hadn't been spoken in years, not with weight. A former officer, a ghost from the original case file, retired early, vanished into obscurity, or so people thought. But now she stood in the doorway of the study, badge in hand, expression carved from granite. Whitford's eyes widened. "You—" Patricia didn't flinch. "I should have stopped you back then. I froze. But this time, I'm finishing it." She stepped forward, handcuffed Whitford with practiced precision, then read him his rights with the even cadence of a woman who'd waited too long to say the words. Ranger finally stepped back, sides heaving. His fur was streaked with Whitford's blood, but his eyes were clear, steady. Talia moved to Ethan, applying pressure to the wound. "You're okay. You're okay, just a graze." "I've had worse," Ethan muttered, forcing a weak smile, though the pain was blooming down his arm. Wells turned to him. "I saw your name in the inquiry notice. Figured if the department was rattling the old bones, someone finally cared. So I watched. Waited." She held up her phone. "I filmed the whole thing. The confession, the locket, the weapon, the attack, the final unraveling. It was all there." "No more whispers," she said. "No more hiding." Ethan exhaled, ragged. "Thank you." But Wells just looked at Ranger, and her voice softened. "Don't thank me. Thank him. He's the one who knew." Ranger lay down beside Ethan, resting his head on the man's boot like a tired sentinel. Talia glanced around the room, the shattered silence, the blood on the polished floor, the open drawer filled with secrets. And in the center of it all, the dog, quiet, still, certain. "He didn't just remember," she whispered. "He made the world remember." Rain clung to the glass windows of Elmridge Police Headquarters like nervous fingers. It wasn't storming, not quite, but the sky had dimmed to a colorless slate, and the air felt taut with consequence. Chief Harper stood at the center of the operations room. Her gray blazer was buttoned tight, her jaw locked, eyes scanning the screen as Ethan sat nearby, his left arm bandaged and cradled. Ranger lay at his feet, silent but awake. "Lock down everything," Harper said, voice low and razor-edged. "I don't care who has clearance. Nobody touches internal files until I say so." Talia was already at the console, typing fast enough to make her knuckles ache. "Encryption active. Access rerouted through me alone." She glanced over her shoulder at Harper, then Ethan. "But if there's even one rat still hiding in this place, we need to move. Fast." Ethan nodded, every part of him aching, but his mind sharper than it had been in months. "They've had 15 years to cover their tracks. One slip is all we need." Talia opened the folder marked Flagged Archives, Witness and Finance, and ran a trace. Lines of code flickered on the screen. Numbers, names, shell companies. And then there it was, 3 payments, from an untraceable trust in the Cayman Islands, directly wired into accounts linked to Charles Whitford, Judge Sebastian Delacroix, and most damning of all, Raymond Black, the mayoral candidate whose campaign slogan was, "Elmridge deserves the truth." Talia's hand hovered over the mouse. He paid both of them. Whitford funded Black's rise, and Delacroix. He shielded the records. That's why Locke couldn't get anywhere. Harper leaned in. Her face was unreadable. "We need warrants." "And not through our system," Ethan added. "If any part of the chain is compromised, someone tips them off." Harper turned toward the glass door. "Then we go federal." 2 hours later, the war room in the basement hummed with quiet intensity. Phones were muted. Agents in plain clothes reviewed the findings. A printer spat out pages of redacted transcripts, receipts, flight logs. Talia moved like a conductor through an orchestra of justice coordinating, confirming, verifying. Delacroix received payment 2 weeks before ordering Locke to cease pursuit of the Lila Grace case, she explained, and another payment 6 days before Locke died. Suicide, Ethan muttered bitterly. That's what they called it. Harper didn't look at him, but her voice trembled slightly. So did I. That silence that followed wasn't accusatory. It was full of regret. Complicity born of trust in the wrong people. Ethan said nothing. He just reached down, resting a hand on Ranger's head. The dog didn't stir, but his tail moved slightly, a thump of life against the metal floor. He was listening, always listening. Talia slid a folder across the table to a federal liaison. Warrants ready to go. Judge Morales signed off under seal. We hit them at sunrise, all 3. What if one runs? The liaison asked. Ethan finally looked up. They won't. They've lived in impunity so long they don't know how to run. There was steel in his voice now. Not anger, not vengeance, just purpose. A few agents exchanged glances. "You're coming with us?" one asked. Ethan didn't hesitate. "Try stopping me." At 5:47 a.m., the lights went out in 3 parts of the city. In a silent convoy, agents rolled toward Raymond Black's lake house, Judge Delacroix's gated estate, and the final sweep of Charles Whitford's now sealed business properties. In Harper's car, Ethan sat behind the driver adjusting the tactical vest they insisted he wear. It felt heavy and pointless compared to the years of weight he'd already carried. Talia sat beside him. "You're not doing this for revenge, right?" Ethan shook his head slowly. "I'm doing it because I finally can." Ranger was in the back seat, eyes alert, head resting between the seat gaps. He hadn't growled since the gala. He didn't need to. His part, in many ways, was already done. But he was still here, because he knew. Somehow, he always had. By 7:12 a.m., it was over. Raymond Black, found in silk pajamas and an open campaign folder, was cuffed in his own hallway, his phone screen glowing with a half-written tweet. Delacroix answered the door himself, asked if it was about some donation issue, and went pale when he saw the badge. And in Whitford's office, locked away in a drawer they hadn't noticed before, was a journal. Leather-bound, inside-it entries, names, dates, including one scrawled across an entire page. Lila Grace. Talia held it up to Ethan as agents cataloged the evidence. He stared at it for a long time. Then he whispered, "We're going to bring her home." And Ranger, tired, grizzled, battered by time, let out one low, quiet bark. It was not a bark for warning. It was the sound of a story beginning to end, and justice finally beginning. Hospitals always smell like endings, antiseptic, paper gowns, quiet murmurs behind sliding curtains. But today, something else lingered in the air. Not grief, not dread. Something lighter. Hope. Ethan blinked against the light as the morphine wore thin around the edges of pain. His shoulder throbbed, wrapped tightly in gauze. A dull ache that pulsed with every heartbeat. But he didn't mind, because Ranger was there. Curled beside the foot of the bed, chin resting on his crossed paws, eyes half-lidded but watchful. The nurses tried to insist on protocol, tried to tell Ethan the dog needed to be moved to the waiting area, but no one had the heart. Not after the news broke. Not after America saw the footage. The video Patricia Wells had recorded Whitford's outburst, the weapon, the locket. Ranger's impossible timing had hit the networks before sunrise, and by noon it had gone viral. 17 million views. Headlines splashed across the country. K9 uncovers 15-year-old cold case. Ranger the hero dog who refused to forget. Justice has 4 legs and a nose. Ethan didn't care for the spotlight. Never had. But this wasn't about him. It was about the dog. The one nobody had believed. The one they almost retired. The one who had clawed the truth out of brick and lies and silence. A soft knock came at the door. Ethan turned slowly. Talia peeked in, holding a stack of printed messages, emails, letters, drawings from school children. At the top, a crayon sketch of Ranger with a gold star on his collar. "Fan mail," she said gently, setting them down. "From all over, Canada, Germany, even a kennel in Tokyo." Ethan smiled faintly. He always wanted to be an international star. Ranger didn't move, but his tail thumped once against the baseboard. Talia pulled a chair up beside the bed. "The mayor's dropped out of the race. Delacroix is resigning from the bench. The state's reopening the full investigation." Ethan stared at the ceiling for a moment. "Locke didn't die for nothing." "No," she said. "He didn't." A pause, then another knock. This one slower, heavier. The door opened and Margaret Grace stepped inside. Time had etched itself into her eyes, but today something else lived behind them. A quiet peace trying to breathe again after 15 years underwater. She walked straight to Ranger. He looked up, not with alertness, but something deeper. Recognition. A thread of memory stretched between them. Margaret knelt, ignoring the discomfort in her joints, and laid a hand on his head. "You knew," she whispered. "All this time, you knew she never got justice." Ranger leaned into her touch. No bark, no growl, just presence. Margaret looked up at Ethan, eyes glossy but steady. "That bracelet, I thought it was gone forever. I thought they buried it with her." Her voice faltered. "But he remembered. Your dog. He never stopped trying." Ethan swallowed. "He wouldn't let me ignore it, not even when it hurt." She placed something gently on the side table. A photograph faded, curled at the edges. A young girl, no older than 10, with bright eyes and the same bracelet around her wrist. "Her name was Lila," Margaret said, "and I think if she could have met him, she would have smiled." For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt the sting of tears press behind his eyes. "Thank you," she said to Ranger again, as if to a priest, a friend, a savior. And Ranger, sweet, stubborn, grizzled Ranger, lay his head in her lap. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was reverent. The digging began before dawn. A soft mist blanketed the woods surrounding Charles Whitford's lake house, an opulent structure turned crime scene. Spotlights cast long beams through the trees, illuminating a path that no one wanted to walk, but had to. Ethan stood at the edge of the perimeter, his arm still in a sling, jacket wrapped tight against the early chill. Ranger sat beside him, silent, motionless, save for the occasional twitch of an ear. Talia stepped over a low ridge of dirt, her boots damp with lake fog. "They found the spot," she said quietly. 2 feet down, bones, fragments of fabric, and the necklace. Ethan closed his eyes. A necklace. Just like the one in the photograph Margaret Grace had left on the hospital nightstand. "She was here the whole time," he whispered. 15 years, Talia murmured. "And no one listened." "No one saw." They both turned as a coroner team gently lifted a weathered wooden box from the soil. Labeled evidence tags fluttered in the breeze like prayer flags. Talia glanced over. They're calling in dental records, but the journal entries match the location exactly. Whitford documented the night. He even referred to her as the fourth girl, like she was just another object. Ethan's jaw clenched. Her name was Lila. The silence after that name hung heavier than the fog. Down the slope, Margaret Grace waited in a brown coat that looked too thin for the cold. She didn't shiver, didn't cry. She simply stood watching as the remains of her daughter, the girl whose bracelet started it all, were placed into respectful hands at last. Ranger stepped forward, then paused. He looked back at Ethan as if to ask, "Is it time?" Ethan gave the faintest nod. Ranger padded down the path, his paws crunching over frost-covered leaves. He stopped just short of Margaret and sat at her feet. Margaret looked down at him, then dropped to her knees. The dog leaned in gently, resting his head against her chest. No cameras rolled, no headlines formed, just a mother, a dog, and a daughter finally coming home. Later that evening, under the glow of 100 votive candles, the town held a private memorial at St. Augustine Chapel. No press, no microphones, just names. The names of 4 girls, 3 lost, 1 finally found. Margaret stood in front of the small crowd, her voice trembling but resolute. "I believed she'd come home one day. I didn't know how. I didn't know who would bring her. But I believed." She looked down at the front pew where Ranger lay beside Ethan's feet calm, eyes closed, as though even he understood the moment's sacredness. Margaret continued, "I want you all to remember that sometimes justice doesn't wear a badge. Sometimes it wears fur and walks on 4 legs. Sometimes the only one who won't forget is the one who can't speak." She lifted the small silver necklace they'd recovered, now cleaned and gleaming faintly in the candlelight. "This belonged to Lila, and now it belongs to no one else." And with that, she placed it gently into the memorial box beside a photo of her daughter. The bells rang outside the chapel, and somewhere, deep in the hearts of all who attended, something settled, not fully healed, but finally at rest. The plaque gleamed in the morning light outside Elmridge PD's newly renovated wing. "Cold Case Division, in memory of those who waited too long." And below, "In honor of Ranger, K9 217, who remembered when we forgot." The ribbon was cut, the ceremony done. Ethan stood alone, hands in his coat pockets, watching the sun slide across the brass lettering. Inside, fresh paint clung to the walls. Desks stood ready. Case files lined the shelves, each waiting for someone to speak life back into them. Talia approached with coffee. "Cold Case Division," she said quietly. "Didn't think I'd see the day," Ethan replied. "Ghosts don't like being ignored." Ranger lay beneath a sunlit window on his K9 bed, thin, tired, but eyes still sharp. "Hey, partner," Ethan whispered, kneeling. "You got your own desk now." Ranger wagged his tail once. Not quite retirement, not yet. At the press conference, Chief Harper's voice carried weight. "From this day, the Ranger protocol applies to all K9 units. Behavioral anomalies scratching, fixating will be documented. What we dismissed as distraction was detection. Ranger taught us that." The applause was real. But Ethan, in the back, only rested his hand on Ranger's head. Later, in his office, Ethan unrolled a mat. Ranger lay down with a sigh, resting his chin on Ethan's boot. A quiet vow. Margaret Grace arrived with cinnamon rolls and a note. "For the team who didn't stop digging, and the dog who never let go." She kissed Ranger's head. "You found her. Now help them find the rest." Ranger's tail tapped like a heartbeat. In a basement thick with dust, Ethan and Talia unearthed truth. Sealed evidence boxes, hidden files, a camcorder, a judge's red wax seal. Inside, a child's shoe, a broken walkie-talkie marked E.W. "Emma White," Ethan whispered. "A class ring, Chris Danner." Report signed by the same judge, Delacroix. "This isn't just a cover-up," Talia said, voice trembling. "It's a system." They loaded the boxes into the van. Back at the station, Harper stared in disbelief. "We can charge Delacroix, and I was going to retire that dog." Ethan nodded. "He didn't just crack a case. He rewrote our conscience." That night, Ethan pressed his forehead to Ranger's. "They're listening now, buddy. And we're not stopping." Ranger's tail thumped once. The courthouse steps filled with uniforms, honoring a man long forgotten. Adrian Locke. Ethan stood with Harper and Talia. For safeguarding evidence, for the ultimate sacrifice, his name, his life, for children, he never stopped trying to protect. Beside the podium, Ranger sat frail but proud. His eyes gleamed with something like knowing. Margaret Grace clutched the recovered bracelet. The chaplain's voice rang out. "Some lights burn after they're gone. Adrian Locke was one of them." As the honor guard saluted, Ranger rose, moved to Locke's portrait, and sat tall. Inside the reception, a display honored Locke. His badge, a team photo, his hidden letter now public. Talia asked, "You think he knew?" Ethan watched Ranger, curled at the base of the display. He knew someone would listen, even if it wasn't someone with two legs. And Ranger did, because some instincts don't die, and some names don't stay buried forever. The porch creaked beneath Ethan's boots as he lowered himself onto the step, lukewarm coffee in hand. Beside him, Ranger settled down with a slow exhale. This porch had become their ritual, not to forget, but to remember in healing silence. Golden light filtered through the oaks as the sun sank over Elmridge, turning the sky rust and violet. "You remember that first night?" Ethan said softly. "Clawing that wall like you'd gone senile, but you were the only one still thinking straight." Ranger didn't move, but his ears twitched. Ethan ran a hand along his back. "You gave me something," he whispered. "Not just justice. You gave me back my name." Ranger shifted, resting his head on Ethan's boot. The town settled into sleep around them, and Ethan smiled. "This sunset, this one's ours." It was near midnight when Talia stepped into the records room. In a dusty corner, she found a small envelope. "For E. Mitchell, if he ever makes it this far." She brought it to the porch. Ethan opened it with care. "If this reaches you, Ranger led you here. That gives me hope I didn't die for nothing. They'll call it a suicide. Let them. The evidence, they'll burn it, but the scent stays. If Ranger brought you to that wall, then justice found a crack to crawl through. You're not alone. Let the dog lead. He always knew the way." Ethan folded the letter, his fingers lingering on the paper like a link to the past. "You knew," he whispered to Ranger. The old dog's paw shifted against his boot. The first stake hit the ground as dawn broke over Elmridge. Ethan watched crews break the earth on land that now had a name. The Ranger Legacy Facility, a sanctuary for retired canines, a place of trails, sunlight, and soft voices. Ranger lay nearby, breath slow but steady. When Ethan whispered the site's name that morning, Ranger had lifted his head, ready. Talia arrived with blueprints. We added the hydro room and the recovery wings named after Locke. Ethan knelt beside Ranger. No fences to keep anyone out. Just a place where no one's forgotten. Ranger's tail twitched faintly. Talia handed Ethan a plaque prototype. In honor of Ranger, he didn't just follow orders, he followed truth and brought it home. A golden sunbeam touched Ranger's wagon. Yeah, Ethan said, I see it too. By afternoon, news crews gathered. The mayor spoke briefly. Retired K-9 handlers, officers, and townsfolk stood in quiet respect as Ranger was wheeled forward, his badge still on his collar. Ethan kept his speech short. This isn't about what we lost. It's about what we learned and what we'll protect, because one dog refused to stay quiet. The first stone was laid beside an oak that survived fire and neglect. Ranger's paw print would mark its base. Not a monument, a promise. A place where tired paws could rest, where instincts were honored, where one dog's refusal to give up became policy. Not a goodbye, a beginning. It was still dark when Ranger stirred. The clock on the nightstand hadn't yet blinked 5 o'clock a.m. But Ethan was already half awake, the way a person becomes when they've lived long enough with the rhythms of another heartbeat beside them. The soft scritch of Ranger's claws on the wooden floor was hesitant, then steadier. He didn't whine, he didn't bark, he just walked to the front door and sat, staring, waiting. Ethan rose slowly, joints stiff from age and too many sleepless nights. He didn't need to ask what Ranger wanted. He knew. All right, boy, he whispered, slipping on his coat. Let's go. The old truck coughed to life like it hadn't in years. Ethan didn't bother with the radio. The silence between them was full enough. They drove without a destination, at least not one spoken aloud. But as the early mist began to lift from the edges of Elmridge, Ranger stirred in the passenger seat. His ears twitched once, twice, and then Ethan saw it too. The park, the one where it all began, where a younger Ethan had first taken a barely trained German shepherd out to test scent drills, where they'd laughed at squirrels, lost tennis balls in the creek, and learned to read each other without needing words, where instincts had first whispered and Ethan had first chosen to listen. He parked without thinking, killed the engine, and let the moment settle. You sure? He asked. Ranger gave a soft huff and stepped out of the truck, his back legs trembling slightly, but his gaze steady. They walked slowly. No leash. Just two souls moving through memories made tangible by morning fog and leaf shadow. Ethan adjusted his pace to match Ranger's. Every step the dog took seemed deliberate, as if checking for ghosts in the grass, watching for phantoms the world had long forgotten. And when they reached it, the old oak, wide and knotted with time, Ranger paused. Then he sat. Like always, as if this were just another day. Ethan knelt beside him, placing a hand on the dog's shoulder. It was thinner now, bones pressing against fur, breath rattling just slightly beneath skin. But the eyes? Still sharp, still there, still watching. They sat like that for minutes that felt like hours. Ethan pulled a folded cloth from his coat pocket. Inside was Ranger's first badge, scratched, dulled, but unmistakably his. You remember the first time we ran drills out here? Ethan asked, voice soft. Ranger blinked slowly, then tilted his head. You kept going after that raccoon instead of the decoy. A chuckle. And when I yelled, you just stared at me like he was the threat. The wind moved gently through the branches above them, rustling the leaves like whispered applause. Ethan continued, You never cared about rules, huh? Just truth, the kind that didn't come with handbooks. A squirrel darted across the grass. Ranger didn't chase. He didn't even flinch. He just breathed, watched, listened, like he always had. The first light of dawn crept over the tree line, casting long shadows that stretched across the dew-covered field. Ethan rested his hand over Ranger's heart. It still beat, slower now, but steady. "You chose this place," Ethan said quietly. "Not the badge, not the glory. Just here." Ranger lowered his head, pressing it gently against Ethan's knee. Not a farewell. Not yet. But close. And Ethan understood something deeper in that moment. Something unspoken. This wasn't just a walk. This was Ranger's final patrol. A chance not to serve, but to return. To the place where he first became more than a tool, more than a uniform, more than a name. Here, he had simply been Ranger. And now here he still was. As the sky lightened into a soft blue, birds beginning to stir in the canopy above, Ethan leaned back against the oak and whispered, "You did it, boy. You brought it all home." No reply. None was needed. Because some goodbyes don't come in tears or endings. They come in quiet mornings, shared breath, and an old dog's decision to sit, one last time, beside the man he chose to trust, not because he had to, but because he knew the truth. Loyalty never asks for anything back, but sometimes, if we're lucky, it gets remembered. The house was still. No creaking floorboards, no humming appliances. Even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath, as if the world itself understood the sanctity of this night. Ethan lay on the living room floor beside Ranger, a folded blanket beneath them both, though neither seemed to feel the cold. A low fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting slow-moving shadows across the walls, memories of 1,000 nights past. Ranger's chest rose and fell in shallow rhythm. Each breath was quieter than the one before, but not labored, not frantic, just fading. Ethan watched him in silence, hand resting gently on the dog's ribs, feeling each movement like a pulse from another time. He could barely remember a life before this dog, and the thought of a life after him felt too wide, too hollow to name. He didn't speak at first, didn't want to break the stillness, but when Ranger's ear twitched slightly, just the barest flick in the firelight, Ethan leaned closer and whispered, "You don't have to fight anymore, buddy." His voice cracked, barely audible. "You've done enough." He reached over, pulled the old police vest closer, now draped on a nearby chair. The patch read, "K9 Unit, Ranger." The thread was frayed at the edges from years of wear. One strap had been restitched twice. But the name still held still, declared a legacy forged not in medals, but in moments. Small choices, quiet courage. "You found her," Ethan continued. "You brought Lila home. You brought them all home." The fire popped once, a single ember lifting like a firefly into the air before fading. Ranger exhaled slowly. Not a whine, not a groan, just a long breath, soft and steady, as if he were letting something go. Not pain, not fear, something else. Duty. Ethan blinked back the sting in his eyes. He wasn't ready, but he knew that wasn't the point. Ranger had never asked him to be ready. Not on their first patrol. Not during their hardest cases. Not when he leapt in front of a weapon. Not when he clawed open a buried wall. not when he followed instincts no one else believed. And now, not even at the end, because love like this doesn't come with conditions, just presence. Just knowing that when it mattered most, they had stood beside each other, always. Ethan shifted slightly, lowering himself until he lay beside Ranger completely, forehead resting just behind the dog's ears, where the fur had grayed in soft, wise patches. "You were never just a partner," he whispered. "You were my compass." Ranger's paw twitched gently, a muscle memory from younger days, chasing signals, clearing corners, leading the way. And then, nothing. No struggle, no sound, just a stillness so profound it felt sacred. Ethan held his breath, waiting. 1 second, 2. Then he felt it, the absence, a final quiet sigh, like wind through the trees, or a whisper between worlds. Ranger was gone. And yet, not. Because something in that room remained. Not just the body, not just the badge, but the being, the devotion, the truth that Ranger had lived and loved with such unshakable purity that even death, in the end, came not as a thief, but as a quiet visitor. Welcomed. Ethan didn't cry right away. He simply stayed there, unmoving, heartbreaking and grateful at the same time. "Rest now," he breathed, eyes closed, cheek pressed to still fur. "You're home." Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, not loud, not sudden, just soft enough to blanket the world in silence, as if the earth itself paused for a moment, to honor the passing of a soul who had never once asked for applause, only purpose, only love, and gave both back tenfold. The sky over Elmridge was the kind of blue that made people believe again. It had rained the night before, just enough to cleanse the dust from the old stone plaza. Now the sun broke through, casting warm light over the crowd that had gathered, families, officers, retirees, reporters, children clutching stuffed animals in the shape of German shepherds. At the center stood a small granite pedestal, polished, quiet, unshakable, and carved into its front, in lettering both simple and bold, "Ranger, the dog who found the truth." A bronze statue rose from the plaque's base, life-size and exact, the tilt of the ears, the alert posture, the faint curve of a tail caught mid-sway. But it was the eyes that held people in place. The sculptor had captured it somehow. That look Ranger always carried, not fierce, not soft, but present, like he was listening to something the rest of the world hadn't noticed yet. Children were the first to step forward. A little girl with red sneakers placed a wildflower bouquet at the base of the statue. Her father followed with a framed photo Ranger during the Lila Grace recovery, tongue out, vest on, eyes proud. Someone else added a toy badge, another a drawing. "Thank you for being brave." Officer Talia Nguyen stood near the front, a ribbon pinned to her coat. She didn't speak, just watched with a kind of reverent stillness, the same way she had when they cracked open that wall, the same way Ranger had stood guard beside evidence that no one else had believed existed. Margaret Grace was there too. She didn't cry anymore. Her eyes had long since dried from grief, but today they shimmered with something else. Peace. Not the kind that erases pain, the kind that finally makes sense of it. A soft clearing of the throat turned heads. Ethan stood near the back, hands in the pockets of his old field coat, now patched along the sleeve from that bullet wound he never quite felt until after it was over. He hadn't wanted to speak, but when the mayor asked, he couldn't say no. He stepped forward slowly, every pace deliberate. At the base of the statue he paused. rested one hand flat against the stone, let it anchor him, then turned to face the crowd. "I don't have a speech," he said, voice low but sure. Not the kind with big words or long sentences. A few chuckles, a few tears. "I just want you to know." He didn't do it for attention. His hand returned to the plaque, brushing over Ranger's name as if he were still there beneath it, breathing, alert, tail gently thumping. He didn't do it for medals, or praise, or ceremony. He looked down, then up again, eyes meeting Talia's, then Margaret's, then the crowd. He did it because he knew. He knew something was wrong when no one else did. He saw what we missed. He never let go, even when we told him to rest. The plaza was silent now. Birds had gone quiet. Even the flags barely moved. Ethan stepped back a pace, took a breath that quivered. "He didn't just save the case," he said, his voice breaking slightly but not falling apart. "He saved me." His hand pressed to his chest, over his heart. "And I'll spend the rest of my life earning that." He didn't stay for the reception. Slipped out quietly as the crowd gathered to take photos and share stories. But before he left, he turned once more to the statue. Just for a second. The breeze kicked up gently. It rustled the flowers at the base, carried the faint echo of children's laughter, moved the trees along the plaza's edge. And in that moment, fleeting but eternal, Ethan could have sworn he heard it. A single bark, from nowhere and everywhere, not loud, not desperate, just clear and sure, like the last page of a book that ends not in goodbye, but in purpose fulfilled. He smiled, not because he stopped missing him, but because in that bark echoed through memory, through marble, through every life Ranger touched, he knew. Some stories never end. They just keep watching, keep guiding, keep guarding. From just beyond the silence, in a world that often forgets, dogs remember. They remember the ones we lost, the truths we buried, the pain we hide, and somehow, without asking for anything in return, they carry it with grace, with loyalty, with love that never needs to be spoken aloud. Ranger wasn't just a police dog. He was a living bridge between justice and compassion. His instincts uncovered what human eyes overlooked. His courage reminded us that silence is not always peace, and that sometimes the quiet persistence of one loyal soul can crack open even the darkest truths. This story is not just about one case or one town. It's about the legacy animals like Ranger leave behind, how their devotion can heal broken hearts, rebuild trust, and awaken a better version of ourselves. So tonight, when the world feels too loud or too uncertain, remember this. Somewhere out there, a German shepherd is still watching over someone, still believing in the good, still listening to what most have forgotten how to hear. And maybe, just maybe, it's time we listened back. If this story touched your heart, comment 1 to honor Ranger's legacy. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that celebrate the love, courage, and loyalty of our four-legged heroes.